Hello? This is a book called Talking to Terrorists, which is really an account of several interviews with people who are involved in terrorism or the parents of people who were involved in terrorism and so on. It's some person who would walk into Palestine or Chechnya and just find people to interview. She also talks to people in Belgium and London, and she is involved with a de-radicalization program the American military runs in Iraq and so on. So it's interesting. I suppose I'm going over this book because I first read it, I don't know, 10, 12, 13 years ago. And I think it's very, how do I put this? Stressful book to read, especially if you've ever had a period in your life where you feel even a bit of what the folk in this book feel, right? When you felt powerless or angry or disassociative or had to deal with stress and problems from childhood especially that never seem to go away. But it's also important to confront these viewpoints. And especially for people of my age, millennials who grew up hearing about the problems in the Middle East. One thing that we tend to struggle with, I think, is trying to understand why this is happening, right? We hear about suicide bombers and terrorists and people going to war and they're living in caves for 4 years in order to fight somebody. And there's all this anger and rage and hate, and then the Americans are supposed to go in and help, but then we get blown up, and it turns out that everyone else in there is fighting each other as well as us. And we hear about places like, Chechnya and Palestine, and there's, suicide bombers, planes, guns, people being taken hostage, and we hear all this horrible news all the time. And especially I remember in high school and shortly after that, we heard about this and we'd just be like, what's going on, right? Like, what is happening? And there is often an attempt to vilify folk like this, to paint them as evil. But as we know from being American and growing up listening to the news, Americans can do bad things too. Right? Evil isn't always cut and dried. We've all known folk that aren't very nice. They're quite mean and cruel, but who we'd trust with our lives anyway. And there's other folk we've met who are quite nice and sweet, but will steal from us at the drop of a hat. Right? Appearances deceive. Actions speak true, and we know the actions taken by terrorists, but why? And I think it's easy to just say, oh, they're horrible people who want to die, and, let them. I think it's easy to say, these are folk who refuse to talk and refuse to compromise. And I think it's easy to say, well, someone suicide bombed, and so they're messed up and there's just something wrong with them inherently as a human being. But I mean, the picture on this, the front of this, is just like of a little girl holding a gun, right? She's got other pictures in here, just of people in houses and dressed up and whatnot. I think this book especially is interesting because she's not just talking to a terrorist and interviewing them. No, she's going in and she's talking especially, I think, to, like, there's a girl she interviews that had a bomb strapped to her, but then called it off at the last minute. She talks to some of the parents of kids who have died or killed themselves. She talks to their friends. She wanders into a slum in Morocco and talks to the local drug heads about what they feel and so on. She also speaks with people in charge. She speaks with a group of folk in Chechnya where hundreds of people died during this hostage taking. And she talks with their parents and the kids involved in that, trying to understand both sides of like why are people killing and destroying, and what are the people who are affected by that like? How do they see it? It's a rather well-rounded bit. And she's a psychologist, so I think there is definitely a bias towards the terrorists here. Not as terrorists, but as people who have suffered, right? And you go into folks' houses and you're like, well, why did your son kill themselves? I mean, you're going to feel empathy for that. I do wish there had been an interview, especially of something like an Israeli family who lost one of their family members to a Palestinian suicide bombing, because she interviews a lot of Palestinians who have lost folk because of Israeli efforts or activities. And that is the part that's missing from here, I think. But she does try to extend herself a little bit. An interview with an Israeli soldier would have been interesting. She spends quite a bit of time in Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza. But this isn't really about, this book at least, isn't really about that. This book is about understanding the motivations for someone to injure themselves so horribly. Someone understanding the motivations for why kids strap bombs on themselves and wander into crowded areas, understanding the motivations for the people who lead these organizations that send people to do that. You know, again, the old saying from Sun Tzu holds, you know, if you don't understand your enemy, you will lose half the battles. And also, if you don't understand yourself, you lose half the battles. So as I go through this, it is both an attempt to sort of, you know, as an American millennial, especially, who grew up with these stories of a faraway land and who knew people that had, you know, lost legs and limbs and lives and siblings to IEDs and whatnot. Like what is happening here, and why especially is it that we grow up hearing about this terrorism in the Middle East, we're going over there to stop, and it never stops, it never halts, you know, and it seems like, what are we doing? So she's involved with the de-radicalization program run by the United States military in Iraq, I believe, and sort of documents how that doesn't work very well, the way it's put into place, the way it's used. And it's also a bit of like the general trend, I think, is that the people who go and choose terrorism, the children especially, the young ones, are traumatized, have PTSD, have watched their friends die, have been thrown in jail multiple times, you know, are imprisoned or saw something horrible happen when they were a child. You know, had grown up hearing about attacks and death and doom, and especially who do have no real hope of a way out. But I suppose we'll begin here. right? All right. So in chapter 2, she starts off sort of as a sidebar in Chechnya, and there were some. She starts off in Moscow. Okay, in Moscow. There were some people who came to Moscow and killed a bunch of folk. Okay, and she's talking to someone from Russia. She says, "Victor, what I want to understand is what could possibly make 40 men and women come all the way to Moscow, intent on taking 800 innocent civilians hostage and willing to explode themselves with their victims." I ask. The person replies, "Chechens are violent, wild people. They have been attacking Russians for centuries. There's no logical explanation for what they did. And although I don't know any Chechens, I recoil as he explains his views, and I don't accept this explanation." Right? And I think we do this too. We'll pick a group that we hear of and go, well, there's no real logical reason for what they do. Sometimes it's a terrorist group. Sometimes it's a political group. Sometimes it's a military group. Sometimes it's just someone we know. And we say, well, we can't understand what they do. They're just crazy. They're just mean. That's what they are like. That's the history of them and their people and whatnot. And I do agree with her here, right? That's not right. It is difficult and tough to understand why people choose to take actions we do not, but there is a reason for that. I've been reading Marcus Aurelius, and that is part of the idea. There's a reason people do these horrible things, and why is that? How do we understand what is happening? There has to be a deeper, more compelling reason. It's not just random attacks. And I've grown up really just hearing that it's crazy folk and tribal alliances and it's the culture, the religion, and whatnot. And I'm like, it doesn't seem quite right. I know people from the culture and the religion and the area. I know people who have suffered, and have PTSD and whatnot, and they don't act like this. But you can see bits and pieces of it here in America, where we are quieter, feel like we're safer. So, and she states her case really here at the beginning. In every case, those who have suffered traumas and have post-traumatic stress disorder also have an increase in fanaticism. We've had so much violence. Sometimes the federals come and arrest anyone just to say they made an arrest of a terrorist. It can be a young man of fighting age that hasn't done anything. They take him to the filtration camps and torture him. If they get released, these young men come back changed. Some of them go immediately to join the Wahhabis. So there's two things to note here. Look at the United States, right? How many folk get picked up for some minor offense, get thrown in jail for 6 months or something, and come out a hardened criminal because they've been exposed to an environment. They can't get a regular job. They've learned things, made connections, and they start on the path to a bad life. Just to point out a story which is familiar to people in my country. Right? Those who have suffered traumas and post-traumatic stress disorder also have an increase in fanaticism. If you've been traumatized, beaten, attacked, hurt, betrayed, then yeah, you tend to have heightened emotions. You tend to be reacting in a more violent manner. I think we've all felt this in one way or another. The difference, as far as I can tell, for most of the terrorist bits she talks about here is that if I'm walking along the street and I get hit in the face one day by a random stranger, the next day I go to the same street and I'm kind of afraid to walk in that area. And I'm nervous walking along. And when I see someone who looks like that person who hit me, then I tighten up and a little bit. But then nothing happens that day. Nothing happens and nothing happens. Then a week, a month goes by, and all of a sudden, the person who hit me, the road I walked on is just a road, it's just a person. But it takes time to get over that. When she interviews a lot of these terrorists, there is no time to get over it. There's no rest. There's no escape. And so I'm trying to understand, like, it's hard to even comprehend, right, as someone who lives like I do, the actual environment that's going on here. I know a little bit of it, from my childhood, and how stressed you can be, and how you can end up making dangerous choices, let's say, in order to escape, in order to emotionally regulate. It can be a bit odd. But she points out here, well, we start out quite sure that fear and psychological trauma are likely high in the list of motivators to terrorism. We also know that these alone cannot be the only causes, because the majority of Chechens share the same horrific wartime experiences as the extremists and do not join terrorist groups. Trauma and fear may be necessary, but they are not sufficient. Just because someone's messed up, it doesn't mean they're going to be activated and go kill and destroy. So what else is needed? It is, I would imagine, an organization, a philosophy that recruits them and says, this is how you fix yourself, and this is what you can do to make yourself worthwhile. And this is what you can do to strike back at the enemy. I think that repeated messaging is useful. It's very rare for someone to randomly decide out of nowhere that I'm going to go and shoot up a school or something. There's a history there. There is a reason. There's a psychological status they have to reach first. The random psychopaths are very rare. Like how... When we hear, some kid wouldn't shut up a school in the States, what is our first thought? Our first thought is, he must have been bullied by someone. They must have teased him. He must have asked for help from the teachers and they didn't do anything. And that isn't always true. Sometimes it's someone who's crazy. But 90% of the time, the majority of the time, they were radicalized listening to this news and this music. Or they had a clear mental instability, and there were warning signs and flashing lights that people ignored. Or, of course, they were bullied and beaten, and so they take their revenge. Or maybe they were part of a gang, and it's a shootout, right? There is this sort of idea that when someone is violent, they must be bad, they must be wrong, right? They must be crazy and they're not understandable. But at least for me, sometimes violence is a very clear answer to a problem. Sometimes violence is the obvious answer. Sometimes violence is the only one you know how to make. Is the only one you're allowed to make, because social issues or your family or your school would not hold you back from better answers. And if you try to do something that is only a little violent, then you're attacked and looked down upon. If you try to do something that is dissocial, let's say, then that isn't allowed and you're attacked and looked down upon. So eventually you explode. And okay, so she talks here about something that comes up again and again. Omar is like many macho boys in conflict zones who saw the men of his country, including his father, who he believed were strong, humiliated and made powerless in the face of their enemy, and this has devastated him. He tells Kapta that he has joined a Jamaat, a Muslim brotherhood of believers who have ties as strong as blood and stand ready to die for each other. This is something that makes sense to me. Right? Like, you grow up and you think your mother and your father and your teachers and the policemen are there for you to help you, and then you learn sometimes that they are not. And you learn sometimes that they can't. And so you eventually, grow up realizing that your father can't protect you from everything, and you're going to have to make some choices. Could you imagine? You're not just like your dad one day is frustrated at the checkout counter at the airport, or your sister and your mother is called names, but actually the armed men come and take them away. They're forced to their knees in front of you with a gun held to their head to recognize that you have to cross a military checkpoint, and there's a guard that comes up with a gun or a piece of paper or a pamphlet and says, "Get out of the car. We're going to search you." And the mighty father figure can't do anything. Or even worse, right? Your parents go to work, they're frustrated, they're degraded, they come back and they beat you up because they can't fix their own lives. They take it out on you. What do? You can sort of accept that, you can move on. What you can also do, though, is say, well, they weren't strong, but I'm going to be. Or this isn't my family, I'm going to find a different family. And if you are trying to recruit a kid who wants to be strong, wants to have a family, that is a prime recipe for a very violent extremist. It's a prime recipe to say, join us, sacrifice yourself for the cause, for the people, because they would sacrifice for you. And this is how you be strong. This is how you strike back at those who have hurt you. Because you couldn't possibly hit your own father, for example. You couldn't actually attack the person who you dislike, or you can't possibly attack the one who's weak and pitiful. But what you can do is attack the big, strong person, and thereby be strong yourself, and thereby take revenge. Omar tells Kapta his story as he paints horrific pictures of violence that no child should ever have witnessed. He explains that these are images he cannot stop himself from remembering. Like full sensory movies, they play unrelentingly over and over again in their mind. It was in Zakan Kurt, he recalled, as his face contorts in pain. A morning in January 2000, Russian soldiers brought two Chechen guys to the village. Their hands were in handcuffs behind their backs, and grenades were taped to their legs. The soldiers exploded them in front of everyone. Their bodies were scattered into pieces. All the people stood and looked, but everyone was afraid to approach them. As I understand, as this Kapta, that this trauma confirmed for Omar that Chechen men are failures, a sentiment that grew from his father's inability to protect their home from the Russian onslaught. When you lose a war, you lose a battle, this affects the village, it affects the people. I mean, I've known folk who were involved in the Vietnam War. I've known folk who were, they're Korean, and they don't like Japanese people, or they don't like Vietnamese people. And they're like, I don't have anything personally against like this person or that person. I don't have any problem with them, but just, the experiences I've gone through, I connect that identity, I connect that race or that nationality with something that's horrific for me. And it might not be anything personal, but still, you can hate or dislike or fear a group because you connect that group with some idea in your mind, with some history that you've managed to find. This can be positive or negative. You can. I mean, one of the things that we grow up with today is you hear, people grow up and they're like, this is someone who hates America. And I think often that it's not someone who hates America. It's someone who is disappointed by American ideals. It's someone who realizes that America isn't as much about freedom and hospitality, isn't as much about welcomeness, isn't as much about, a dream, and isn't going to achieve everything they say, and has either failed someone on the inside, failed people of a certain race or of a certain economic situation. That America has said, we're going to go and save you and help you, and then ends up supporting some horrible dictator. It's not folk who hate America, it's people who had a vision of how it was supposed to be, and it turns out that's not the actual reality. Folk who you can be on the opposite side too, right? You grow up and you're like, well, America is about the nuclear family and about patriotism and about gun rights and about free speech, and then you feel like you're being assaulted by the new liberals and whatnot, because they're trying to change America. They're trying to abandon family values, and no, not really. They have different visions. They have different hopes and dreams and ideas of what America is, and we're still struggling with that. But we do that in a very, generally speaking, non-violent way. We talk about it because we have free speech. Because we don't think that people are going to shoot at us or kill us or beat us up for our views most of the time. We might yell and scream, but that's really the extent it goes to. We might be bullied, but not going to be dragged out into the street by a rabid mob. Here, though, this kid is talking about, hey, some soldiers brought two of my ethnic group to the village and blew them up in front of the house, as a warning to everybody that you better not mess with people. Right? This is an execution style. That these are people who've watched their family members and their house members in their village and their people in their country be attacked and destroyed. So what do? Well, my folk then aren't strong, they aren't powerful, they aren't good. So who do I become? Right? If I want to be strong and powerful and good, well, here's a rabid terrorist group that's telling me if I follow them, that I'll be strong and powerful and good. So you do. One by one, these events, and many more like them, turn the innocent and trusting child that Omar had been into a young boy that realizes he has to find others who might offer him protection when his family cannot. And like all Chechens, he knew where to find them in the mountains of Chechnya among the rebels. If you are Chechen or Palestinian, if you are black in America, if you are some farmer just trying to make a living in Colombia, if you are Uyghur in China, if you are a Muslim in India, if you are Native American, if you are Scottish or Irish, depending on the time period you're talking about, then you grew up with this idea, with this feeling that your people are stepped upon, aren't strong. But there always is someone strong. Join the IRA. Join the Sandinistas. Become part of some vigilante group. Start joining an underground Muslim organization. Fight back. And sometimes we hope that we can fight back by nonviolent means, right? You hope, you want to believe that going out in the streets and marching and holding signs will change the world, and that going to talk to your political representatives will get them to understand what's happening, what's going on, and why things need to change, and it's not right, it's not good. You think that your vote matters. You think that you can change things by your own individual actions. Are we looked down upon? Well, I can be prideful and I can be good. Is there an issue with black-owned businesses? Right? They can't get loans. Or I'm going to start my own bank. Or I'm going to sue this group for discrimination against women or whatnot. Because I've been harmed by this, and I'm going to go through the courts. I'm going to fix things. I'm going to change the world. And I think in America, that's the ideal. In most of the world, that's the idea. That's what you want to believe you can do. But sometimes it's not that easy. Gandhi had the right idea, But the simple fact of the matter is, if the British had been willing and able to go in and slaughter 1 million Indians, then Gandhi's work would never have gotten off the ground. It was because the people he's talking with it was because the British had their own ideals, because the British recognized the limits of their own power. It was because the British soldiers did not want to cause all this harm and didn't want it to show up in the news, and they cared how their people thought. You know, if you're a citizen of Britain sitting in London and you just hear about this horrific act taken by your soldiers, and a horrific act and horrific act and horrific act again and again and again. You know, if you're in America and you hear about some torture that your troops and your government is doing, then you want to go out and you want to stop that. You want to say, I am not for this. But your country's going to go back, reply to you, oh, this is needed. We had to waterboard those people. We had to, blow up this guy. And I know it caused collateral civilian deaths, but it was worth it. And the idea of nonviolence starts to crack. That really, America has been at war for most of its lifetime. Really, America has a kill list and CIA. And we look at films and video all the time where it's about this violence and violence and violence. And so we think of America as strong, but we also think that America is nonviolent. Because in our country, for the most part, the feeling is that works. You know, blowing up a train station isn't going to change the world. It's going to change anybody's mind. It's just going to cause more hate and trouble. But when you live in a different area, when you're facing different people, when standing up and marching in the streets can get you shot or killed. You know, I was in Ukraine a few years ago in the Maidan, I believe it was called, and people were telling me that there were students there protesting and the government had them shot. This caused massive protests across the country, which eventually ended up kicking out the pro-Russian Ukrainian government and revitalizing the democratic institutions. Well, then we had the war, and you have more troubles after that. But this is what I was there in between. I was there before Russia invaded, and this is what people told me, that once the government chose violence and killed these kids, then the entire country erupted in protest and managed to make them move. You know. And that's the idea. That's what we hope happens, that violence is answered by nonviolence, that we change the world. But what if you didn't believe that? What if all you had seen was protesting or trying to change things got you killed? Sometimes by your own folk, right? Say you shouldn't work with the invaders. You shouldn't try to collaborate with them. You know, sometimes by the enemy you're trying to deal with. You know, you're attacked by, what are they attacked by here? The Russians or Belgian Jews or the police or the drug runners or the government itself, right? You're just attacked and attacked and attacked, and you go, well, how do I act? How do I respond? Because I'm trying to be nonviolent, but it doesn't seem to work. Or I'm willing to be nonviolent, but the other person is going to be violent. Or I'm trying to be nonviolent, but nonviolence needs mass action, and I just can't get people to act. Or if people do act en masse, and there's hundreds and thousands of us, it doesn't change anything. Or we're being shot and killed, or we're being arrested, and we can't fix this. So you choose violence because you don't know anything else that works. Because you try to act in the right way, and it just fails and fails and fails, and you're going to everything from the school to the police to the UN. And you're saying, help us, and it doesn't work. Meanwhile, there's infighting in your own mind or among your own people. Oh, I should do this way, I should do that way, I shouldn't be this, I should be that. But we're all individuals. We have to make our own choices. Sometimes you make bad ones. Right? Like he says, Omar's dreams of dying as a martyr in war and going straight to paradise are also a powerful diversion from his real fears. Hey, am I afraid of this? Am I afraid of dying? Or I'm afraid of being, sexually assaulted? Am I afraid of growing old and achieving nothing? Well, instead of confronting that fear, I can be macho, I can be bravado. I can pretend I'm brave by following a religion or joining a gang. I can pretend I'm brave by listening to my perfect ideal. I can pretend I'm brave by wandering around the streets and beating up random folk because I'm not willing to go and attack the police. I'm not willing to go and deal with nonviolence, right? One of the problems of nonviolence is you are hit, you are attacked, you're beat up. Well, you see this in the United States in the civil rights era. You turn on the TV and there's folk, their arms linked together, being blasted by fire hoses. There's folk who we know very clearly are totally innocent and then picked up by some random mob of hooded KKK folks and hung or beaten half to death for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Are we surprised when violence results from this? Violence is met with violence. And one of the problems that can happen from this, of course, is that it repeats on itself. It grows and grows and grows in a cycle. And we're not really sure how to get out of it. He says, do you have any dreams of a future life without war? Kapta asks. Omar blankly answers, no, I don't. When the enemy is in our homeland, I cannot think about it. This is one of the issues with movements just in general. You get so focused on doing this, and this is how I act, and this is what I do, that you have no real understanding of how to achieve the end. Because the end of any movement that seeks to change the world is its own destruction. Right? The end of anti-racism is the destruction of anti-racism, because we have achieved the goal. The end of anti-colonialism is the destruction of anti-colonialism, because we don't have to fight against it anymore. We're all independent and secure and don't suffer from the effects of that. It's the same with terrorism, I imagine. I think we're attacking somebody. We're beating up the Israeli soldiers, or we're going to drive them all out. And then what does Palestine look like after that? We have seen this 100 times in 100 countries. There is some internal dissent. You have many different groups, different rebels, who join together, overthrow the government, and immediately begin infighting. Or immediately begin fighting with someone else. And I think sometimes we look at that and we go, what's wrong with these folk? You got the country. You won. Why do you keep trying to push more and more? Like, who are you fighting? And oftentimes it's they don't know how to stop fighting. They don't actually have a vision of the future. And we do this too as individuals quite often. We're stressed out and we're freaking out and we're just trying to get through the day and get through the day and get through the day until years have passed. I remember talking with a guy once I met in community college, and he was telling me that he used to, be involved in gangs and crime and trouble. He used to, go around jacking cars and things like that. Then he was caught and got caught, thrown in jail, caught, thrown in jail. And when he was about 26, he told me, he realized that he didn't want to do this anymore. He realized that he had to change his life around, and so he did. You know, he got out and he was living with a cousin or something by the time I knew him. And he was trying to turn his life around by going to college and getting a degree in something. But you often need that sort of quiet time, that reflection, that maturity. And if you're suffering from PTSD from the time of 6, you don't really have that. It takes a long time. It takes a hard effort. You're never really sure that you've fixed it because you may believe you're fine, and then something happens and you go back in time and go, oh my gosh, I'm getting a flashback. I'm disassociating again because of the stress. And I thought I fixed it, but I didn't quite. I've got to go again and again and again. And you know, life, it never stops in a way. But eventually the goal, the right, is to get over it, is to accept what happened to you or what you did and say, that's fine, that was an event, but I will not let it control me anymore. It's not easy, though. He said Yaqub's cousin recalls the effects of war and the deaths of his family members on Yaqub. He was an adolescent, 15 years old, and his father and brother were killed, Yaqub's cousin says. He became closed and gloomy, saying that he should avenge his family members, that he hates the Russians who have killed him. All his interests became reduced only to the weapon, war, and revenge. Then he began to be interested in religion, although before he didn't even know how to pray. His mother was very much afraid of these changes that occurred in him so quickly, but she no longer had any influence over him. After his father's death, our extremist uncle was the biggest authority for my cousin. You know, they went to a terrorist camp, and he trained there, and then he went into fighting, and then he went into hiding because this is a fugitive. You know, as Capta sends these interviews to the internet for me to read, we will see a theme repeated again and again in conflict zones. Fear of facing a violent and senseless death, especially among the young, will also becoming empowered by the militant jihadi ideology. It's a powerful force propelling the young into terrorism. We see the sense of control joining a terrorist group can give its supporters, as well as the alluring promises martyrdom offers. When death is looming anyway, immediate delivery into paradise doesn't look so bad, right? If I'm going to die anyway, like all the adults I know, like all the powerful people like my father and my brother, if I'm going to die like that anyway, I may as well go out fighting. And if I'm gonna suffer, I may as well hit back. I think tons of us have been in a fight where we're gonna lose, right? Like I've been in fights where I know I'm gonna lose. I'm dealing with someone who's 50 pounds heavier than me and 6 inches taller. I'm not coming out of this, but I'm gonna get in one shot. You know, I'm gonna get in one good punch before I go down, and we get in that one punch. Then we collapse. But, you know, you want to strike back at least in some small way. And especially in an area where you are given access to guns and explosives, it's not about going up and punching the soldier or punching the person who attacked you once. No, it's let me use a gun to fix all my problems. After all, I'm going to die anyway. May as well get in one shot. And there's a bit of hero worship in this too, right? When you are just a person, you don't know who to hit, you don't know what to do, you don't know who to attack, right? It's sure some soldiers killed my parents. Sure, there was a roadside bomb. Sure, we're discriminated against by Whitey. But I don't know who to hit. You know, I know it isn't all people like that. You know, that there are kind soldiers too who smile at me and give me candy. You know, I got white friends or black friends or Asian friends, and the discrimination, it doesn't seem quite right. I see this person on TV and they're funny. They can't be that bad. But I meet other people who are, and right, the ideal of any interaction with a person is to see them as an individual. Is to see them as an individual person without where color and race and economics and culture and the country they're from are unimportant compared to who they are and how they act. Are they a good person? Are they a bad person? Can they understand me? Are they violent or nonviolent, right? But we take shortcuts. We don't really know what to do sometimes between this understanding that people are individuals and this understanding that people are also members of groups. But if I join a group, you know, a terrorist group here, and they tell me that you are of this type, you know, you are a member of our group, or you know, I'm a member of this race, I'm a member of this gang, I'm a member of this city, I'm a member of this country, and our enemies are that gang or that city or that country or that people, then it's a lot easier, right? They're gonna, the group you are part of is going to tell you who to attack, it's going to tell you who to hit. There's a difference between warriors and soldiers, and a lot of gray space in between them, right? A warrior is well trained, acts independently, attacks and defends and does all these, whereas a soldier follows orders, right? I might, as a soldier, not understand why I'm holding this position. You know, might not understand the bigger position I have in the entire front, might not understand why I don't get supplies sometimes, but I'm told what to do and I follow what I'm supposed to do, and if I do that, I think it's going to turn out okay. It can be very comforting to exist in that way. But of course, as you gain more experience, as you more practice, then you start to become a bit of a warrior, start to act independently, you start to see things in your own eyes and speak with your own words. And once you do that, you become a leader of soldiers, right? Once you do that, and you can say, I know the right, I know the good, I know the just, and if you follow me, you too will be right and good and just and powerful. You will take revenge. You know, and this can happen in a terrorist organization, of course, but it can also happen in a more innocuous fashion. You know, you could join a cult, you could join a religion, you could join the National Guard, you could join a country, right? I am American, and I take pride in that. And I know what it is to be an American. It's free speech and democracy and the flag and being unafraid. And so you talk with people and you see kids who don't really know what to do, or are confused, or are angry, or are choosing violent paths when they should be choosing non-violent paths, or are acting in such a way that they end up hurting themselves, and you just want to help them, and so you do. And sometimes it's nice, it's good. You have mentors. You have folk who teach you how to act or instruct you in business or help you get through school or help you to deal with your parents' death or help you to deal with your friends or a breakup or something. This can be good. This is just human connection. But sometimes you can be taken advantage of. I think we've all had that, right? You talk with someone and you start to trust them, you start to like them, and then you realize they just wanted your money or your body or some action from you, and then they abandon you, they drop you like a hot rock. It's even worse when they send you somewhere. You aren't a hot rock, you are a missile aimed at their enemies to do their actions for them. And then you're a soldier. You just follow orders and then you'll be happy. You'll be fine. And if you're already nihilistic, if you already think you're going to die, if you're already depressed and angry, and this person, this idea, this group, this religion, this philosophy, this political stance is telling you that it's all okay, as long as you're part of us, then you are inclined to be part of that group. What I'm trying to get at here is that the same psychological states and relations that happen in our everyday lives happen as well in the lives of these terrorists, the lives of these kids who are 16 and child soldiers, in the lives of some 21-year-old who blows themselves up in the middle of a crowded mall, right? They go through the same things we do, just more intense or more often or in a different way, right? There's a means of understanding what is happening here, but reflecting on our own lives and understanding the transition and the difference, right? It's like seeing, orange and a good orange, right? It's like the difference between craft paint and a real thick oil paint that just goes in ice. You realize, oh, it's the same thing, the same color, but there's differences, right? It's like moving from a CRT to a 4K flat screen television. Oh, it's the same picture, but it's different. It's like looking at a picture of a sunrise and then going outside and going, oh, I recognize this, but it's more intense. And really, the lives of the terrorists she talks about are very intense. You're always worried. You're always being attacked. You're always in trouble. Right? Elza collapsed when she learned after 2 weeks of searching that her husband and brother were found dead in the outskirts of town, their mutilated bodies thrown in a ditch. I mean, we as individuals are upset when people we know die because of old age or because of sickness. Imagine how it is when it's because of murder, right? It's because of death. And you know who did it. And you know other people who this has happened to, and it's just the life you live. What if that happened all the time? Like for the last 5 years, someone I know has died in every single one of those 5 years. Some of them were young, some of them were old, but it gets to you when it happens again and again and again. I can only barely imagine how it is when this happens from a young age, right? Like my first grandparents died when I was 18, and that was really the first time that someone close to me that I had known was gone. What if that had happened at 6 with a brother? What if that had happened at 12 with a cousin? How much more strongly would I have been affected? Would I have been messed up? Something like that. Case of Elza brings up a number of important points. The first is a quick radicalization of a person previously described as gentle and kind that can occur following a traumatic death, injury, or torture of a loved one. The second is that exposure to an extremist ideology and group that is eager to equip traumatized persons for suicide missions is necessary to make use of motivations of trauma and revenge inside a conflict zone. If Elza had only been traumatized but never exposed to an ideology and group that glorified taking one's own life in order to kill others, and stood ready and willing to equip her, she would never have been able to carry out her suicide act. Instead, she would have mourned and struggled her way through the post-traumatic stress and traumatic bereavement of her husband's and brother's deaths, and possibly become a psychologically damaged person, but eventually would have likely made a livable adjustment to her grief, as most war and murder survivors do without becoming violent. And really, that's part of the answer here. These terrible things happen to us as well. They affect us for the rest of our lives. My mother talks about the East Side rapist, how She never know anyone who was affected by it, but she heard the stories, she saw the news, and this enters into her mindset, right? She's like, I always lock the door at night because I remember that news when I was young. And that's just one bit, right? About one person who terrorized a community intact and killed people. Imagine that 10 times, 100 times. And I think you begin to understand what's kind of going on here. And then imagine that someone tells you there's an answer, right? I think we often have met people who become religious at a certain age, like they realize they're going to die. I better become religious now. Or they narrowly escape death and they become religious. Or someone they know died and then they become religious because they are forced to confront this problem. And someone says, there's an answer. You can come to the church. You can learn. You can be among folk who have suffered as you have, or who are willing to listen to you. There is a reason, I think, that as religion becomes less popular among the youth, you have psychological counseling is more popular because you need somewhere to go. And sometimes it's friends you can talk to, but oftentimes you have to find a group or a person to help you deal with grief and struggle. In the States, often these groups are benign, they're benevolent. But there are as well cults. Even here, you get gangs. Even here, you get folk that tell you these are easy answers. You just have to follow what I say. You know, it's okay to be messed up and wrong, but I can fix you, or I can help you, or I can at least hide from you your own deficiencies and fears. I can make you feel strong. Look, here's a drug. And so as we get into the Middle East here, as we enter Palestine, we sort of see this, that it's, you can always find, the people will say in here, right, that they can always find a group to equip them. There's always somebody willing to send them. Right? They can say that, so-and-so started becoming more religious, or started talking to more radical folk, or started, learning how, or bought themselves a gun, right? Something like that. There's always this time period. And part of the question of how we deal with terrorism is these two issues. As an individual, how do you stop people from joining terrorist groups? And part two, how do you break up the terrorist groups themselves? How do you see someone who is a terrorist as both an individual and a member of a group at the same time, and sort of unwind these two strings of thought and emotion in order to understand what is happening, what is going on? Okay. So she ends up flying to Israel and talking to students at the college there, and then going in and talking to other folk, kids and parents and so on. She starts this by talking in college to someone from Palestine, and this is how she gets a connection, right? I know someone, one of my students knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody that is a terrorist that I can go interview. Okay. All right. he says, he's talking, I think I have this PTSD thing, my student Ken confesses anxiously. We're at Vesalius College, the English-speaking school within the Free University of Brussels, where I teach psychology classes alongside my research duties. Ken says, it was the second day after I arrived in Jerusalem for my year abroad experience, and I went to have lunch at the Hebrew U cafeteria. I finished my lunch and left in friendly terms. When I walked out of the cafeteria, it exploded. The soldier he talked to was dead. The place was completely destroyed. There were dead and dying people and body parts scattered all around. I just stood there like a dumbass staring at them. I didn't do a thing. I didn't help anyone. He was in shock. He was in the cafeteria. He leaves and it's blown up. All of people dead. All the blood and flesh and broken bone and screaming. He just stands there. And she says, it's normal, Ken, to freeze in a trauma. It's called paratraumatic dissociation. And it actually protects you from being totally and completely overwhelmed. You have flashbacks from this. He says, yes, I get flashbacks, right? It's detached, unreal. I chose to go to Israel because I was watching the Palestinian Intifada, the uprising, on the television every day. And I thought I'll go there and see it for real, not on the television, to make up my mind what to think about things when I see them for myself. But when the bomb was off, I suddenly saw everything back like it was on the TV screen. That's how I see it now, too. It's in a television box and not real. It's disassociation. I'm in an event where I can't do anything. Like, there's no action to take. There's no way to save myself or to fix things. All I can do is sit here and try to process this emotionally. So you disassociate. It's like watching yourself. He says on a TV screen. I'd say it's more like, more like a old school isometric RPG. Like Icewind Dale is how I experience stuff like this, right? It feels like I'm looking on myself from above, and this is where I am, and this is where all things are, and I'm trying to just like, okay, understand where everything is, because I'm freaking out because I'm in a stressful situation. It's too loud, or someone is screaming at me, and I'm just going, okay, breathe in. Breathe out. Everything slows down, or the person who's screaming at you, their voice just like disappears. You can't really hear them anymore, what they're saying. You could be asked 30 seconds later and you go, I had no idea what that guy just shouted at me. You're in a flight or fight response where you're just prepared for everything. And you're outside yourself. I've experienced this in minor ways, but I've never had dozens of dead folk behind me. I've never had this survivorship guilt. So I think it's one of those interesting bits. Like, I can understand a little bit of what's happening here, but it's the degree. It's how do I react when, my dad is beating me up or something, is entirely different in scale from how do I react when people are dead and I can see the blood everywhere. I'm upset by dogs or cats dying, but at least in my experience, they're whole, right? Their heart is stopped, or the brain aneurysm has happened, or their lungs give out, and you bury them. You're sad, but it's not horrific. On the other hand, the other day I walked in my room and I have a cat that hunts mice, then eats them. So I'm walking in my room, I look down, and there is half a mouse, like the rear half of a mouse. Like, you can see the spine of this mouse lying on the floor. And, I'm like, okay. I close my eyes. all right, we're just going to step over this mouse. We're going to go and eat breakfast. Then we're going to get in the car and go do that thing I'm supposed to do. We'll come back and hopefully the mouse will be gone. Like, I don't want to deal with this. Don't want to have to pick up half a mouse by the tail with the guts spill out. And oh my gosh. Right. The cat ate the rest of the mouse and slept all day. So I came back, half the mouse was gone. I'm like, all right, good. I don't have to deal with that. And how am I reacting to memories of something that happened years ago? How am I reacting to a loud room? How am I reacting to half a mouse? Imagine how we would react when it's human beings. Imagine how that would affect us. Right? So the point I'm trying to get here is that, like, these kids are messed up. It happens to soldiers as well, right? PTSD. I know folk who, like, we're in Vietnam and they don't want to talk about it. Like, I don't want to go back. I don't want to review that. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to picture it, right? And there are folk, on the other hand, who do go back to Vietnam and try to come to terms with what they did. I've met those folk too. But these are, for the most part, people that are able to escape the situation, right? Ken here he has PTSD, and sometimes he says he disassociates, but he also is now in Brussels. He's in Belgium. He was in Israel for a year, and he left, and he has this calm area he can go to. The folk I know who were in Vietnam, they come back and they don't really get over it, but they also don't have to deal with the immediate effects every single day. The difference, of course, for someone in Chechnya or Palestine, or someone who deals with racism in the United States, for example, or gang violence in the inner city, or drug cartels taking over your town in Mexico, is that you can't escape. It's here every single day. Like, I remember I've walked around in Mexico, and sometimes there are armed guards outside the bank walking by, and there's a soldier in uniform with a loaded rifle, as far as I can tell, standing in front of a bank looking around, and you get the sense, we're in a dangerous place. Right? This isn't good. You're reminded of the troubles. She's going to talk to a bunch of Palestinians, and really it's like they can't escape either. That just happens. It happens. It happens. There's the Oslo Accords, are something that was an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians and the PLO, yes, where the idea was that they would stop the fighting and they would each have areas of control. You'd have some Palestinian self-rule, and then things would quiet down. They could slowly move on. This did not happen. Right? And I think part of the problem, part of the reason it didn't happen, is that the Oslo Accords were the stupidest idea ever designed. Because what you ended up doing was you had these enclaves where you'd have Palestinian self-rule of a city or a town. And then between the cities and towns, you would have Israeli military control. So you would end up with checkpoints. So there's all these checkpoints. You want to leave your town, there's a checkpoint. You want to go from A to B, there's 2, 3, 4 checkpoints. You want to go into Israel for your job, there's a checkpoint there. Right? So you have this constant interaction with soldiers. When you have millions of people and millions of interactions every single day, eventually something's going to go wrong. Eventually someone's going to get shot or killed, and all of a sudden every experience you've ever had. Oh, I have to wait in this stupid line for 3 hours, or you know, I was thrown in jail, or my cousin was thrown in jail, or I knew someone was thrown in jail, or I saw on TV about this event that happened. Or there was one time a soldier was rude to me, or I was looked at as if I was dangerous, and it all comes bubbling up and bubbling up, right? And that was a horrid mistake. Right? Witnessing injustices in a conflict zone is enough to be an individual motivated for terrorist activity. Why? Because humans are empathetic. We feel, right? Look at 9/11, for example. How many people, you know, died? How many people, their family members died in 9/11? And how many people in the United States felt that we had been attacked, felt that we had been assaulted, or that our family had been killed, that we were no longer safe. You know, we saw it on TV in 5th grade for me. And I remember the reaction all the other kids had, you know, the horror, the surprise. Oh my gosh. The same happens when we hear about a wildfire destroying the town of Paradise, when we hear about earthquakes, when we hear about some chemical explosion, when we hear about water crises, when we hear about police assaults and some kid being attacked in the middle of the street, or shot in self-defense, or some school being shot up, right? That is us. Why? Because we are American. We identify because we are people. You see someone on TV, and there's a reason charity works, right? There's a reason you get these mail pamphlets. There's a reason we used to have those ads on TV. Look at the starving children in Africa. Look at them. They're just like you, and they're suffering, and you could help. So sometimes the opposite can happen, right? Look at them, they're attacking us, and you can strike back. Look at them, they hate us, and you can stop them. Look at us, they despise our culture, and you need to stand up and do something about that. We need to vote, or march, or attack them, or change the law, right? Or find any random person that looks like them and string them up on a tree branch. It's an answer to, how do I deal with these feelings? How do I catharticize these terrible emotions I have? I could be quiet, I could be focused, I could go to therapy, I could become involved in a hobby, I could read books, I could meditate. You know, all these are helpful ways to dealing with this stress and this issue. But I think what you need most of all is hope, that it will get better, that I won't feel this way all the time. And really what you see as these Palestinians and the Chechens and whatnot talk is they don't think things will get better. They don't see any way to fix the world. So they're going to go out burning. It doesn't always have to happen to you. It just has to feel as if it could. Right? I mean, how many folk today, just in the United States, are scared of the right or the left because, oh my gosh, it could happen to me. I've never been in danger from a transgender person, or I've never been in danger from a member of Tren de Aragua, but it could happen to me.